Hey, Linwood. Hey, Karen.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome to People Rising LinkedIn Live, March 17th. And she's not here yet, but she did get her Learn Coach Model Group post up, which she gets it out there first thing when we join. I just think that's so funny. Shelly will be joining in just a few minutes. I'm sure Kim will be here pretty soon as well. If you're listening, please let us know by just chatting. Oh, I've done something different. So now there you go. That's what I was talking about, that Shelly had gotten out. It's so funny to me. But welcome, everyone. There she is. There she is.
Ellie!
I made it.
Hi, Shelly. How are you? Welcome.
We were hurting for some fashion, so I'm glad you're here, Shelly.
Listen, and I brought it today, y'all.
You always bring it. You always bring it.
Happy Friday, Karina
Smith. It's so great to see you guys, everyone. Welcome. Why don't we go ahead and introduce ourselves for those people who are new to us. Please introduce yourself. Peter.
I'm Peter Laughter here in Brooklyn. I am the founder of True Bearing, and because rock stars are seeking meaning, I help companies tell stories that attract and engage the people who matter most.
Awesome. Shelly, why don't you go ahead and go?
I'm the problem child because I always have a long intro. But
You're
Shelly.
Still working it out, and that's good.
I've been working on it, y'all. Okay.
This is called experimentation, everyone. This is how you do it.
I'm going through a transformative change. Okay, and I'm Shelly Jeffcoat. I'm straddling both fences. So on the daytime, I'm an architect for values and culture at a Fortune 500 company. You can find this on LinkedIn. And I also own a company called LCM Group. And I just wanted to say, I just came off an amazing call for a company called Parade Deck. This is March Madness. And so we are, for those of y'all who should still be watching me from over there, this is what happens on the other side, y'all. So please make sure you love, like, and follow everyone on this session so you can learn more as well. So that's me. Karen.
I love your intros. So I'm Karen Brieger. I am joining everybody from snowy New Hampshire, where we had 26 plus inches of snow the other day on top of what was already on the ground. And I know I apologize to anybody joining from Nevada or Utah or Colorado. Yes, I do not hold a candle to your snow totals, but it's been fun. Anyway, I am a chief people officer. I'm actually in transition. I've had experience in a number of different industries, public, private, or private equity. And, my HR superpower really comes in the relationship side of things, the coaching, the mentoring, the development. And that's why being part of this fantastic community of people is just energizing. And I learn so much from each one of you each week, and happy to be a part of it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Karen. And Kim Blue, welcome. So good to see you.
Good to see you too. Apologize for my raspy voice. I've been sick this entire week. But saved it all for Greg today because I'm super excited for you all. So hello, everyone. Kim Blue, fractional HR executive, both coming from inside of corporate and doing some external work, coach, consultant, strategist, leader of K Blue Consulting, a member of this amazing community, People Rising, alongside some of the brilliant folks that I'm getting to know and understand more about their work and their passions. And so happy to be here. Excited for our conversation today.
And Kim, the raspy voice sounds great on you. You should get like a late night soul funk DJ job while it lasts. It's awesome.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Like I can listen to Kim talk all day. I'm good.
Oh my goodness, that's pretty funny. So my name is Linwood Ross. I am the founder and CEO of Accelerate. And we're in the business of helping people get more work done faster. And we're going to be bringing more of that to you in the coming weeks. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Our guest today is Greg Satell. He'll be joining us in a little while, but we're going to get the fun started here with our conversation. Greg is here to talk about transformative change. I don't know if folks know how much they know about Greg's work. Greg is a innovation expert. He's a transformative change expert. He's written a couple of books. His most recent book is called Cascades. Really brilliant book. I really encourage you to grab. I should have it ready, given that Greg is a guest. This just goes. All right. So you see, I'm not that great a host. I don't know where my book. I don't know where.
No, Linwood, don't
together.
go beating on yourself now. Yeah, unacceptable.
I don't know. It's in here. It's around here somewhere. I'll find it.
He's got a book. We know that. Yeah.
He wrote a book. It's called Cascades. And normally I would be ready. It's because I had to walk the dog. Anyway, I'll find it while other.
It's the dog's fault. Yeah.
Well,
Right.
Yeah. No, it's the accountability. I got an accountability issue. So what do you think, guys? We started a conversation. Actually, it was in our first show. This came up. All right. And I won't say it was controversial what I said, but I had questions about change management and its effectiveness.
It wasn't controversial. It was, I think you'd hit the nail on the head, and the gasp that you got across the room, we all were like, oh no, he just said it out loud. That's what it was. So, shout out to everybody who's in the chat. Thanks for joining us. But this idea about how do you create, even before we get to how do you create, is the other part. What is transformative change? Because there's a lot of folks who are doing some version of change management that is more like a rinse and repeat, is not necessarily transformative. Okay, so that this is something that
Give me an example of that, Shelley. I want to know more about that.
Oh my gosh, yes, I've got my notes. So first of all, so as I'm thinking about people's strategies, and as we lay people's strategies out, so if we are thinking about, okay, now we're gonna focus on improving our bench for senior leadership. I'm just making this up. Okay, there's no real company. I'm not calling anyone out. For increasing potentials or building a succession plan, women in leadership, et cetera. But in order to do that, there's some things that we need to do within the organization so that these are long-term changes, et cetera. So I worked at a particular organization, not the one I'm with today, where we did something that was transformative, which means that we considered the entire process from hire to retire. We actually built a succession plan, meaning we had people engaged. Not only did we build a succession plan, but we also let the folks know who were being benched that they were a part of it, because we started realizing that some of the top producers were leaving because they didn't think that there was any growth plan for them. So the secret was out. And then we built a change management model around that so that we could communicate that, not just to the potentials, but also to encourage other individuals in the organization that this is something that you can march towards in terms of career growth. And that's part of the change management structure that was built in to support this particular initiative within, at that point it was called talent development, or L&D, or part of the function. So that was one way of creating something that's a transformative. And then the results showed that when we looked at the numbers, we saw the attrition numbers go down. We saw the increase in hire in these targeted areas, and we saw growth in the business. So that's one example of transformative change. There have been other examples when I've been involved with HR initiatives where someone just thought it was a great idea. There was something on LinkedIn, it sounded great, and so therefore they jumped on the bandwagon. It wasn't a transformative change. It was a branding change or a name change on some things that we were not doing very well. And then there was no change management structure built around it. So employees had no idea what this meant to them, or why the leaders should, the C-suite, why they should buy into this as something that was required or needed for the business. So that is an example of an initiative that is not a transformative change. It's just a name change, and then it's poorly executed. So the thing that we touched on, that Linwood, that when you shared when we talked about change, one of the things we talked about was within the HR community, there's a lot of change management and opportunities for change management. But I had not been a part of a true change management a solution or response in many years. And I've been in corporate America for about 30 years, y'all. Okay. So I'm excited. That's why I was saying I'm excited to hear about what really is transformative change. Are we, is it that we're using the wrong term? Maybe that's not the terminology. Maybe it's not meant to be transformative. Maybe it's a shift, right? And then going back to then, how do you actually create that, and what do we need to have in place as an organization to make sure that we're building that actual change? So that's what I had.
Thank you.
Did that help?
Yes, it did.
Fascinating. It's interesting. There was Alex Partners, which is a consulting firm. I think it's a mid-market consulting. If you're in Alex, I don't know if it's a mid-market consulting firm. I know sometimes folks get touchy about how you describe their organization. But anyway, Alex Partners is a management consulting firm. And they did a study, I guess, survey of several thousand CEOs. 98% of those CEOs felt that they were going to need a business model change. 98% in the next 3 years. Okay, that is, we're not saying that would actually happen, but business model changes are really significant changes. I mean, they're huge. It's not, okay.
Yeah, it's a big firm.
I'm getting it. Alex Partners is a major firm, but focuses exclusively on restructuring. I just got a note from the ether. Thank you, Greg. So anyway, but I think that's, and hopefully Greg will touch on this, but it's the changes that are occurring in our economy that are requiring businesses to undertake major transformation. And I think what the pandemic did was, because it accelerated the adoption of technology, it also accelerated the need for these major changes. So the couple of things that are still lagging, I think, are in the areas of people, helping people to develop. So we didn't get that really during the pandemic. And I can't remember the second thing that I thought hasn't happened. Here's Karen, did you want to say something? I saw you sort of like.
No, I'm nodding in complete agreement with everybody. A thought that came into my head too when we talk about change management, and I think part of the reason we don't get to transformative change often is because we mistake. It's so easy to be busy, and we think that because we're so busy, we're working towards that change, when the reality is we often aren't focused on the outcomes. And we're not rewarding and recognizing those that are focused on the outcomes. We tend to get distracted by the busy, and that busy prevents the transformative change, because we're often not working on the right things with the right kind of focus. So all of these things that Shelley said, that you've said, absolutely. And it'll be great to talk to our guest and about how do we transition from the busy work to the real output-based transformative change.
That's a great insight, Karen. I really like that.
Yeah, I'm going to say, wow, you really touched on, quite a few things there that I think are vexing many organizations, right? The thing that really stood out that you mentioned to me was the prioritization. What is a priority?
Mhm.
And that can be such a huge challenge, particularly when you're in the middle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because
Well,
go ahead, Peter.
Well, it's also, sorry, William, but it's also a
No.
huge challenge for senior leadership. And
Yes.
so, I mean, I think that's like, and it's a big question. How do we get our mid managers to adopt our strategic initiatives over the run the business activity that they are completely consumed in? And I think that's, yeah.
That's actually a different problem than the one that I was speaking to. The problem that I was speaking to was actually conflict in the C-suite about what the priority is.
Mhm.
So that you've got, things are siloed.
Yes.
Not everybody is necessarily on the same page. And the next thing you know, you have people that are being pulled on initiative that's coming down this silo, and then they're getting pulled on an initiative that's coming down this silo. And where do I spend my time? How do I manage that? And that's a completely different kind of issue. But all different kinds of what are you seeing out there, folks who are in this space? You're in organizations and you're dealing with these initiatives that are coming down. What is actually working? I mean, because the statistics are out there, right? We hear that there are all these different initiatives that fail. How are you experiencing that priority, the conflicts between priorities? What are your experiences out there? We'd love to hear what's going on.
So I think the other thing, Linwood, that is important, you said something about the pace at which the technology is being created, right? And I think Karen alluded to this when she was speaking. Karen and Shelley alluded to this when they're talking about transformational change, right? So we don't have like formal processes because we can't prioritize what it is that we need to do. But then there's also this notion that the technology is outpacing the rate at which we can keep up with the change. So if you look at things like in the HR tech stack, are we building things to support the actual change, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's organizationally, whatever that needs to take place? But can we do that at the same rate that we're watching things change? And then you mentioned openly, I mean, at the top of our conversation, right? The economic drive that's having impact on how quickly we need to change, right? So there's market shifts that are happening. Then we don't have the people tools to be able to facilitate change management fast enough, because if we're allowing people to do it in certain processes, right, then it kind of is that whole reverse of we have to slow down to go fast. People don't see it that way. So then the change doesn't feel transformative, it feels reactive, I think. And so then we're reacting to what people are saying they need or what companies are saying they need. I think that might be leading to some of the discourse that you're talking about in the C-suite, which is, well, I'm reacting to this thing over here, and someone else is saying, no, we actually need to react to this or prioritize that. Do we have the technology or capabilities to be able to react and respond to do that, right? Or are we upskilling, to some of our conversation last week, right? Do we have the skills and capabilities to be able to respond in lieu of the technology that's there that can help drive some of this transformational change? Certainly at that mid-management level, right? I don't think that the time has been invested into that leader to be able to do that. And so if that lags, if the technology is lagging, right, then we're kind of at this slump. So it doesn't feel transformational. It's that drudgery that we know change to be. So I think as you all were talking, the point about the technology came up, being able to support the actual change itself, like, but is it keeping up with what we're talking about? And I don't know that it is.
That's fascinating conversation already. Look at what Deborah has.
Yeah,
I know.
I don't know who she is, but I want to be friends with
Deborah
her.
came out
She's singing
like,
my song. Yeah.
Like, okay, or with a bazooka, okay, it's not mid-management, right? Or the rank and file. Okay, it's the C-suite. No one wants to give up power. They are functionally siloed, and no one focuses across the company from customer to cash in the bank.
And-
What she said.
Yeah, and also I think that's really important to remember is so power, and authority are fluid and dynamic. So where the C-suite screws itself up is by holding on and hoarding to that power, and because they can't, and then they don't recognize when power has shifted within the organization, and therefore they don't listen. Yeah. So Deborah, that's a great point, and one of my passions. Yeah.
Somebody else in the chat, I think it was Jason, just said intentionality, right? Which ties into all of this too, and that C-suite and how intentional they are. And yes, thank you, in the direction that we're heading.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating conversation. I mean, when I think about this comment about power in the C-suite, who's responsible? Who is the person who's responsible?
Yeah, so my friend Thomas Rottenberger, who is a consultant and storyteller and does a lot of storytelling and strategy work, his point is that C-suite should not be. That's not where strategy should be. Because they have no idea what's happening on the ground. C-suite should be made up of strong operators who make sure that the communication and the operation of the organization is going well, and is identifying, and the people who are closest to the action, the closest to the customer, who really see what's going on, have the ability to be able to report what's going on and let strategy develop from that point. And I think that's a really interesting model.
I agree with that, Peter. That certainly in the age of networks, what we see is, right, the market is moving. There's so much change happening. Things are moving so fast. What has happened to our organizations is the rituals of hierarchy and command and control, they're now a burden. In the industrial age, it made sense to operate in that way. But where in this networked world where things move so fast, we need to move strategy and action out to teams, call it teams of teams, where they are really engaging, whether it's with customers or with the supply chain, and they're working in a creative way to solve problems. And the leadership, mid-management, is acting as a guide, right? And helping to facilitate these teams to solve problems and get evidence about what's going on, right? And find the people that they need to solve the problems. I mean, I think that's spot on.
So does that mean leadership? Oh, go ahead, Shelley.
Oh, and I was going to say that goes back to what Peter mentioned at the top about the role of mid-management and the disconnect between mid-level management and C-suite. And so a lot of the conversations are happening in the C-suite with the HR leadership team who are not tapped in. Okay, they're not tapped in on a strategic level with mid-management. It's a generalist conversation. So there's a huge breakdown that happens. And then we have a transformational project, and it's going to shapeshift the organization to. I literally can write this. Okay, I can brand it out because I've done it time and time again. I love Karina's statement that they're making poor decisions because they're scared to take. I think a lot of times they're making decisions based on the information they're provided. So it's not even necessarily that the C-suite they're making information. they're getting information fed in from a smaller population, and sometimes those folks who are influencing those conversations have their own priorities and initiatives in mind. So now you've got, again, back to competing priorities. So I'm going to push, listen, if I'm with the C-suite, I'm going to push my priority because it's aligned to my KPO and where I want to, where I want to see the business going, all those things. So we're coming in with different colored glasses into the same suite saying, if I'm HR, do this. If I'm talent capability, do this, right? If I'm strategy and acquisitions, do this. If I'm legal, do X. And so they're getting fed all of this information. And then, of course, it's up to them to kind of, know when to kind of, go through that and make the right call. But they're kind of acting on what they provided. So it comes back to who owns. So from a people strategy perspective, HR owns any transformative change. That's kind of an easy one. Thing is, we don't really know what transformative change in HR looks like.
But Shelley, don't we all own transformative, not just HR, right? That's why I believe that's why it fails. If HR is the owner of transformative change or of any change, then it's dead on arrival.
Yes.
It's only successful if we all own it together and we're all working collectively together. That we will find success in achieving that change goal.
Where we have 2 or 3 priorities and there's a common shared goal, not just what's for this group and what's, et cetera. So I love that point.
With an alignment.
So Greg must be coming on because I see Lenwood scrambling to get the book. So
I don't know how I lost track of the book. No,
I've been busy this morning, Lenwood.
Yeah. Here it is. Here it is, Cascades, which is Greg's book. And I didn't mean to interrupt, Karen, but
No, that's great.
I'm sorry. I did want to try to find the book so I wouldn't be just totally embarrassed. But here it is. Greg Satell is our guest today. This is a perfect time to bring him on. I cannot wait to hear what Greg has to say. Greg wrote an article not too long ago. I think it was titled like The End of Power or something to that effect. So I can't wait to hear what he has to say about power and transformative change and how networks influence all of it. I'm so excited. So here he is. There he is, right there in the middle.
Oh, Lenwood,
He's got one
did you
too,
need one of
Lenwood.
those?
And 3 behind him.
Lenwood, I can tell you, I had an experience last week. I don't know if I told you this. I was reading this book, a book called How Minds Change. And I was on the last chapter and I started thinking, this seems really, really familiar. And then a couple of pages later, there's my name and Cascades. It's the first time it's ever happened to me that I was just like reading something randomly and all of a sudden I'm in there. And now I'm on this with Lenwood and Kim Blue. I haven't seen you for months.
Nice to see you, Greg.
I finally chased you down. I just needed to.
You needed to come on here.
Chase Lenwood.
Rising.
Yeah. I was excited that you were coming. I told them at the beginning, I was like, I'm sick all week, but I've been like saving up my voice just in case I had like one brilliant question to ask you.
That is fantastic. So Greg has been in the background listening to our conversation. I know you have some strong feelings about change management, but I'm really curious, just to get your take on change management, why it works, why it doesn't work. And we'll go from there, Greg. What do you say?
Well, let's start with, the vast majority of times it doesn't work. And we know that from the research. It says 70, 80%. And I think we need to split that into 2 very, very separate buckets. The first bucket is that it fails because the dirty little secret is most of the so-called OCM units at large consultancies are really there to cheerlead for some other initiative. So they, there's a big technology implementation project that's supposed to be transformative. The consultant sets up the client with a set of vendors, designs the system, and then and they want the transaction to close, so they bring on this OCM unit, which is really just not really change management. It's really internal communication plus training. And they want everybody to feel good about this change. Once the transaction closes, they get paid and they don't really care. So it's not hard to see why why change fails in that context. When that is not a factor, change fails very simply because people resist it. And if you can overcome resistance to the change, it'll probably happen. If you can, it won't. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but that is true. So that's where you need, and what we do when we work with organizations, we focus on the resistance first, not what a fantastic idea it is and how much everybody's going to love it. And it's not because people don't like change. When you mention change to almost everybody, they'll have tons of ideas about change that they love. It's other people's change that they don't like. So what we do, one of the first things we do with organizations when we sit down with them is we go through a resistance inventory, because we find resistance usually breaks down into 5 buckets. So lack of trust, change fatigue, which is a big one, and we can get back to that later, but those numbers were scary even before COVID. So lack of trust, change fatigue, perverse incentives. Sometimes, people are supposed to be behind the change, but they're paid for something else. Switching costs, which are often very, very real. And then the final most difficult category is resistance related to identity, dignity, and sense of self. The simple fact is, anytime we set out to make significant impact, there's always going to be some people that aren't going to like it, and they're going to work to undermine what we're trying to achieve in ways that are dishonest and underhanded and deceptive. And that doesn't make them bad people. Actually, this is something we all do. We all have attachments. And when we feel those attachments are threatened, we tend to act in ways that don't reflect our best selves. And I think anybody who's ever been married or had kids has experienced that. And just the one piece of good news is that the tipping point is much, much lower than you'd expect. The Everett Rogers, the research he did back in, I guess, in the 40s and 50s, he estimated it to be between 10 and 25% of the system. Erica Chenoweth, who researches political revolutions, she found it to be 3.5% of the society. And more recently, Darren Santola at the University of Pennsylvania estimated to be 25% of an organization. So I take all of those numbers with a grain of salt, but the salient point is nowhere have I seen any evidence to suggest that it's anywhere near 51%. So I think that mind shift in particular is helpful. We don't have to convince everybody. We only need to get to that 15 to 25%. So I know that's a lot to unpack, so I'll leave it there.
So Greg, I do have one question that before your methodology, and you touched on the 70 to 80% failure rate of transformational change. And so what I've been really just completely perplexed by is that number has been consistent for the last 20 years. And yeah, I read an article beginning of last year that banks are planning on spending $300 billion on digital transformations this year. And so they know that 70% of those dollars are going to be wasted. Why do they continue to put up with it? That's what I've just never understood.
That's a really good question. I guess because nobody thinks that their transformation is going to be. Everybody thinks they're going to be in the 30s.
Transformations fail all the time, but ours won't.
Exactly.
I can tell you, I think there's another, and I hate to go against my good friend Lenwood, but I think this VUCA myth that we're undergoing some period of amazing change when most of the numbers tell us differently. I mean, of course, some things change faster now, but industry churn is slower, industry concentration is higher, productivity growth is lower. Are we undergoing faster change now than in the late 90s when everybody was trying to get on the internet and remember ERP transitions? So what I think we've done, and this gets back to change fatigue, we've created an environment where managers or leaders want to be seen as pushing change. And also they don't stay in assignments as long. So launching initiatives, leaders are very incentivized to launch initiatives, not necessarily for completing those initiatives. I mean, if you start a 3 to 5 year initiative, your chances of still being in that job when the initiative is supposed to have culminated, that's probably not going to happen. So we have this horrible cycle where initiatives are launched and then they sort of fall by the wayside, where and new initiatives are launched because now somebody else has come in that job and they say, no, I have another idea for transformation. And most of the people, we're sort of conditioning people to say, well, yeah, transformation, yeah, well, we'll see if they're serious about it this time. For now, I'll just kind of put my head down and
That's interesting. I thought you were
over.
going a different direction with that comment, but actually what you're saying is that initiatives are not going anywhere because I'm not part of it, but
the last 10 initiatives failed.
10 initiatives failed or didn't go anywhere. And so, I'll kind of wait and see what happens. So it's not necessarily an apathy,
right,
but it's a lack of engagement because they don't expect anything to actually come of it.
That is definitely part of the problem. And we see that in the numbers. PwC did a big survey about this. I think it was 2016, 17, something like that. So pre-COVID. And I think it was 65% of employees were experiencing some sort of change fatigue. I know when I was still running organizations, I would often say to people, because my executives would say, hey, we need to do this change. We need to, we really need to do this. And I'd say, yes, I know we really need to do it, but we're not going to do it because we're doing these other 3 things. And, organizations have limited capacity. And one of the most important things leaders do is make choices. And making choices means saying no. So one thing that would improve the situation is pursue less changes that you're more serious about, because pursuing change that doesn't happen is just a waste of time.
So that actually, you said something there that was kind of interesting, which I hadn't really. You actually are saying change fatigue. The definition of change fatigue is basically people saying, well, I'm not going to do anything until I actually see something happening. Is that, or
yeah, and I think it is important to look at this, 15 to 25% tipping point. You don't need the urge to persuade, the urge to convince is a warning sign. That's a red flag. If you don't if again, anybody who's ever been married or had kids knows how difficult it can be to persuade even a single person of something. If you think
I know what you're talking about.
if you think you're going to persuade hundreds or thousands, that's a very, very tall order. So, and I just lost my train of thought.
Sorry.
So I don't know. Oh, yeah. So when you feel like you need to persuade people, at least in the early stages, that's a signal that you either have the wrong change or you have the wrong people. You want to start with people who are enthusiastic about the change, people who need to be empowered. They don't need to be convinced. And you need to do. And I know you had Ed Morrison on, so he probably he calls it a something project, a
Pathfinder project.
Very similar concept is a keystone change. You need to make that change work somewhere, one system, one location, one department, one whatever. Find somebody to champion and show that it can work, and get out of the business of selling an idea and into the business of selling a success. And that's where you can get to that 15 or 25%.
I think I don't recall whether it was Karen or Peter that was talking about this earlier with, power and things being more diffuse and starting small. It sounds like what you're saying, Greg, is top down isn't the way to go. It's really people who are out in the organization empowered or enabled with some skills about how to make a transformation work, finding that thing that they're excited about and calling that their keystone project. And if they know how to, accomplish, build what you just said, some excitement around it, people who might be interested in the project, and grow it from there, get some success small. If that's what it sounds like you're saying, or am
Well, I'm saying find somebody enthusiastic, right? If it can work in the, I don't know, Topeka office, right? If you can make it work there, if you can make it work for this one system, a famous one of the things I covered in my book, Experian, they were doing this massive cloud shift to cloud infrastructure away from on-premise. And while they were doing this, there was a number of objections to it. One was had to do with their business model. The second, cybersecurity. While they were undergoing this process, one of their key competitors had one of the largest data breaches in history. And then there was friction with regard to shifting to agile. So one of the things they did is they say, we're not going to push they only started with project or product managers who actually wanted to build cloud-based projects. So they didn't have any special power or anything. They were enthusiastic. But they also started with internal APIs. They didn't do external APIs. So there was no real issue with a security breach. So they were working only with people who wanted this to happen, and they were doing it in the safest way possible. And once they succeeded in that, then and by the way, if they had failed, and they probably did fail, nobody would have cared, because they didn't have this kickoff meeting. Nobody was even talking about it until it was a success. And then it started spreading, and that's how you get to the 10, 15, 25% from, one small initiative, two small initiative. It's important to remember what kills change is resistance. So you want to start off planning for that. But change, and here's another misnomer, change is never top down or bottom up. It's always side to side. And every level of support and resistance exists at every level of the organization.
Can you give an example of side to side resistance, Greg, or change push?
Yes. So let's stick with the Experian example. This actually did start from the top. It was the global CIO came in, but it wasn't pushed there. It was pushed by him going out and finding uh, product managers, very, very middle, that were that were excited about the cloud and excited about agile. Another example was exactly the opposite. At Procter and Gamble, a middle manager had this solved a problem in a particular project, which is apparently secret because he can never tell me exactly what it was. But he had a big success, and he went to the CIO and he said, "Listen, I want to evangelize this. I want to." And she said, "Okay, if you can find other people." And he spent time going around the world just finding people who believed what he did. And happily, it was around then that my book came out. And 18 months later, he had a movement of 2,500 people with this. It's called PXG. It's a movement for process improvement within Procter and Gamble. And just, I believe, last summer, it passed the 50,000 employee mark. So even at Procter and Gamble, 50,000 employees seems like a lot to me.
So, Greg, the conversation we were having about the C-suite, and a lot of folks have put that in the chat, right? I would love your thoughts on the approach that you're talking about, right? So, like, mobilize around the change within those folks who are motivated to do that. How do you plug that into the C-suite, or where does that get back to them? Or are those two things mutually exclusive? Do you just move forward with the change and then bring them on later, or get their buy-in, or whatever their support looks like later? Or do they need to be involved at some point early in the change so that they can help, evangelize or help move it forward, or be a part of that like core group that you're talking about?
It's highly contextual, and you can find examples of both. Sometimes the C-suite does, like the Experian example I talked about. The the Procter and Gamble example didn't have anybody really involved with the C-suite, but it started working. That's how you get support. You actually start it working. What you don't want to get yourself in, because there's going to be people who want to kill your change, always. And again, they will do it in ways that are dishonest and underhanded and deceptive. But you don't need to tell them about it. They don't need to know. One of the concepts is called the failure to survive victory. And it happens, and it comes from political and social movements. Certainly happened to us in Ukraine, but it always happens in organizations as well. People think that once they get that initial success, once they get their project budgeted, once they get executive sponsorship, whatever it is, that things are going to be, easier, that everything's going to be downhill once I get my project budget, once I get approval. Never happens. In fact, it usually gets much, much tougher, because that's what draws the people out. That's what brings the knives out, because now they see that this change is actually a possibility. So you want to make sure when you get to that point, you're selling a success, not selling an idea. I want to go through, if you don't mind, I'll go through a short exercise just to see if anybody has experienced this. So you're in a conference room, and let's say there's 8 to 10 people. You're discussing some initiative or some idea. And, some people are really enthusiastic. A few people, are somewhat skeptical, and they have some questions. But over the course of an hour, a slow consensus starts to build. and you start moving to next steps. And all of a sudden, somebody who hadn't said a word the entire time throws a complete hissy fit in the middle of the conference room and completely discredits himself.
Once or twice.
Yes.
Have you ever been that person is the question.
Yes.
No comment.
I mean, we're not talking about bad people, right? We're talking, this is human nature. And think about why that happens, and you can begin to see why change fails. You have some people, you have an entire range of opinions. Some people who are enthusiastic, some people need a little bit of convincing, some people who have some serious questions. But that one person, because for whatever reason, this idea threatens some attachment that they have such an objection to it that they can't even articulate why they're so goddamn angry. And so they don't even say anything. And when they see it's going to go forward, they can no longer control themselves. And sometimes that means that they have the hissy fit right there in the middle of the conference room. Sometimes, much more often, they leave the room and start quietly sabotaging it. So that's what we're up against. So we do not want to, when we're exposing our idea, when it's just an idea, not successful, doesn't have any support, we don't want it to expose it to that kind of resistance. The other thing, and sometimes there's generally two ways. Well, there's really three ways to deal with these kinds of resistance. There's some other ways. The first is set up what we call an internal red team, where I say, Kim, I can tell you're skeptical. That's great. We need somebody to keep us honest. So you tell us when you tell us when you have questions. And that, with the people who are merely skeptical, that turns the skepticism from a negative thing to something that's very, very constructive. And you could really save a project and uncover problems that way. Yeah. The second thing is just to wait it out. Eventually, they will lash out and they will discredit themselves and send people your way. And the third way is something called a dilemma action, which my friend Serja Popovich came up with. And that is to create a situation where there's a shared value and there is a competent act, there's a constructive act. And they are put in a dilemma where either they need to disrupt that constructive act or violate that shared value. Either way, they're going to discredit themselves. And that kind of moves things along. And I could go in more detail about that, but that's a whole nother thing in itself. And I know we're going to wrap up in a few minutes, but the one point I want to make about dilemma actions is the key to making a dilemma action work is to identify that shared value. And that's also the same thing you need to do to bring in people constructively, to identify with shared value, get out of the business of differentiating values, what differentiates this idea, and into the business of shared values and common ground. And the best way to do that is by listening to people who aren't crazy about the idea. And that, if I can leave you with one thought, is to actually make transformational change, you need to overcome resistance. And the first step to overcoming resistance is to identifying shared values and common ground.
That's
really
I love that.
Very powerful. Yeah. Let's we've got someone here with a comment about that. The dilemma.
Greg, I was laughing when you were having us, asking if we were in the room. The person I've been in the room when the person throwing that hissy fit's the CEO, and that's always that's devastating because that's the person that you would hope is championing and celebrating the successes for everyone.
Well, and it's often with this, when it's the CEO, it's often a subject that they brought up, and the discussion went the way they didn't.
Went a different direction that wasn't theirs.
That didn't go the way I hoped it would.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't want you to have that idea.
You know what?
Exactly.
Kind of like Lenwood in this and this little session here. Right?
No, I mean, I think, I don't have any challenge to what you're saying, other than a disagreement about the nature.
Alex
of,
Partners.
What did you say?
Alex Partners.
Yeah. They're definitely mid-market. No. Just kidding.
By the way, if anybody from Alex Partners shows up at your office, you're in some deep trouble.
I actually have a friend who works at Alex Partners, so I do know them. But what I was going to say is, I don't know what I was going to say. I put this up. Go ahead.
So Deborah mentioned a book which I have not read about, The Magic of Conflict, which is one of my favorite. I got to find Deborah and connect with her after this. But The Magic of Conflict. And I think that is one of the things is we look at opposing views as against us rather than contributing to us. And I think it is this dynamic of conflict that we've fallen into as a society of conflict is me versus you, as opposed to me and you versus the conflict. And I think that is a really critical distinction that just doesn't exist within organizations today.
Yeah, a great way to address that is with yes and, right? I may not agree with you, but I'm going to find the 10% of your idea that's a good idea, that's good. And I'm going to acknowledge that and say, hey, Peter, what I like about that idea is X, and a way we could build upon it, right? And it creates this cycle where we're all jumping in and we're sharing and we're brainstorming and of those ideas that even if it started with something I thought was a terrible idea, it forces me to find the good in it, and it forces others to, and we're working together to get maybe even to an even better place.
The one thing, Karen, is I find that yes and has become, for a lot of people, a nice way to say shut the F up.
But you know what, Peter, it's interesting, and this is coming from positive intelligence and the whole idea around that as a way to really try and find the consensus in a place where you think there isn't any, right? Because if we start with the premise of even if I hate your idea, rather than saying that sucks, I know that deep down there's even this small 10% that has some merit to it, and I'm going to always search for the 10% rather than focusing on the 90 that I hate.
But I think it is an absence. For me, it's an absence of curiosity, right? Is we hear something and we yes and it or we reject it, but we don't really understand where it's coming from. And I think that is the area of that kind of holding on to power. Is so often, when people are suggesting something that's for personally, when people suggest a different direction, I object to it. 9 times out of 10 is because I don't understand what they're saying. Yeah.
Well, and it goes back to Greg's point about listening.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If to the naysayer in the room or the skeptic in the room, we have to listen to them to understand why.
Yeah.
And
the greatest,
the strongest, the most effective weapon that you can have is a shared value unearthed in an attack. If you can identify the shared value in an attack, and I think the LGBT movement is the strongest, is the best example of this, where after 30 years, or even longer, they won with family values and defense and marriage. If you can identify a shared value in an attack, that becomes a very, very strong argument. So listening, very much to what she was saying, listening for that shared value, even in an attack, can be incredibly effective.
That's brilliant, Greg.
Yeah, really
I love that.
fascinating.
I love
And
that.
that was sort of the thing that I really, when you were talking about like that listening and just
Mhm.
really going after that understanding about, you know, where's this coming from, or what can I pull from this that we share,
Mhm.
right? How can I, it may not happen right in the moment, but, you know, listening in and taking it and just really thinking about where the person's coming from and what the shared value might be. I mean, that's brilliant. And, you know, certainly worth having you on this program.
Yes, this was I could listen to you all day. This was fantastic.
Thank you. Tell that to my wife and daughter, right? One small caveat: when you're listening for that shared value in the attack, that is usually not going to be effective with that person or in that conversation. But to the people because you have to remember they're making that attack because they found it effective in another context, and that's really helps you to evolve your messaging in a way that'll land.
Wow. Thanks so much, Greg. Our hour is up. Before we go, though, Greg's got something new coming out in a couple of weeks or shortly. Change OS. You want to mention
Yeah,
that?
we're launching with my partner Andrea Cates. We're launching Change OS, which is an end-to-end operating system for change. It's a combination of my work in Cascades, which is change strategy, Andrea's work on facilitating execution, which is change activation, and then also continuous change management, which is OKRs and cadence and all that. So we should be launching that in the next few weeks.
Awesome.
Thank you for mentioning that.
You're welcome. Thank you so much, Greg, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for your comments. There's Andrea right there. End-to-end operating system for change. There you have it. Look for us next week. It's just going to be the panel next week. Lots of stuff we've gone through for the last few weeks. We're going to be talking about all the things that we've been talking about and trying to make sense of them for where we want to go next. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
So much fun, Greg. Thank you.
Make Friday
This
worth
was
it.
Great seeing all of you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.